we have formation moments this week. We have experienced already our session on child protection. Our visit to the dicasteries reminded us of the theme of integral human development, participation of laity in the church. Now we have a formation moment on a sustainable planet depends on all of us. More than an hour together. Of course, this is connected to Laudato Si and connected to the resolution that we have chosen on the environment. So this is just a process of deepening our familiarity with this theme. Both Mary Beth and myself will be presenting today, and Mary Beth is very specialized in this area. As a scientist all her life, a research scientist, also with her husband Walter, they have been very involved in protection of the sea, if I understand, and the question of pollution of sea life in the east coast of the United States, in this high level that research scientists can perform at. But ecology is an issue which is remarkable for how many different people need to be involved in it. It is interdisciplinary, as well as the science of understanding the damage we are doing to our environment. There are the moral questions. How can we motivate ourselves to behave more ethically? There are political questions and cultural questions. How can we change the attitudes of our society so then politicians can make good decisions? This is, of course, related to education of the young. So at least we have an interdisciplinary two people here. I'm less expert, but I do teach a course on ecology and theology. And I hope to complement what Mary Beth will be saying in this more scientific way with reflections that are more from theology and, in fact, spirituality. Mary Beth will start her presentation now, but just before that, I'd like to ask her to say a word about the work she does giving this talk, so to speak, all around the United States. So Mary Beth is not only a scientist who's competent in this area, she's the president of her national organization, and she spends a lot of time trying to influence women in the United States to take this issue to heart a little bit more. So we'll be hearing what she says to them, but I'd like to just ask for Mary Beth for any comment first on what's it like trying to communicate this to the women that you meet in your organization especially. Two things, what helps them and what resistance do you continue to notice, if anything?
Thank you, Father. In traveling around in the country, I've noticed a difference in the different parts of the country, and it has a lot to do with the political divisiveness that we're experiencing at present. Climate change is a divisive issue in the United States. Not everyone accepts it. However, when I give this talk, after I give this talk, many people have come up to me and said, now I get it. I said, now I believe in climate change and global warming and understand the impact, and I'm going to change. So I haven't really met any resistance after the talk, whereas there were people who came to me prior to my speaking saying, no, I don't believe in climate change. But they've changed their minds after hearing the science of it. This past year, our organization studied Laudato Si, and there was this bit of resistance to wanting to do this. But after hearing this talk and after studying the document, they have now accepted climate change. So it's been good. And I'll continue. All right. Thank you. So we're talking about Laudato Si on care for our common home. Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, or Praise Be to You, is a worldwide wake-up call to help humanity understand the destruction that man is rendering to the environment and to his fellow man. While addressing the environment directly, the document's scope is broader in many ways, as it looks at not only man's effect on the environment, but also the many philosophical, theological, and cultural causes that threaten the relationships of man to nature and to each other in various circumstances. This document is in many ways the epitome of Pope Francis. It is an unexpected topic, it presents gospel truths, and it provides a challenge for every believer and non-believers too. From the outset, Pope Francis states the goal of the document when he writes, "In this encyclical, I would like to enter into dialogue with all people about our common home." Normally, papal documents are addressed to the bishops of the Church or to the lay faithful. But similar to Pope St. John the 23rd's Pacem in Terris, Pope Francis addresses his message to all people. The goal of his dialogue, when he writes, "I urgently appeal then for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. We need a conversation that includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect us all." The above is at the heart of the document, but Pope Francis also has a very striking call to conversion for those in the Church as well. He writes, "The ecological crisis is also a summons to profound interior conversion. It must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians, with the excuse of realism and pragmatism, tend to ridicule expressions of concern for the environment. Others are passive. They choose not to change their habits and thus become inconsistent. So what they all need is an ecological conversion, whereby the effects of their encounter with Jesus Christ becomes evident in their relationship with the world around them. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional or a secondary aspect of our Christian experience." There are 6 chapters. I'll go through the titles of each. Chapter 1, what is happening to our common home? 2, the gospel of creation. 3, the human roots of the ecological crisis. 4, integral ecology. 5, lines of approach and action. And 6, ecological education and spirituality. Now, there are 10 important takeaway points from these 6 chapters of Laudato Si that we'll just list here briefly. It is an overview from a religious point of view. It is a spiritual perspective. It tells the disproportionate effects on the poor. It is critical of our embracing technology without regard to its consequences on our world. It is an authoritative teaching. It is an encyclical added to the body of the Church's social teaching. It is not optional. And it is discussion on ecology that is grounded in biblical roots. It shows how all is connected. Our environmental decisions affect all. It embraces science. It's based on church and contemporary science. Selfishness and indifference to the poor and to climate change are critiqued. Global dialogue and solidarity is expressed. This is our common home. And last, he speaks of the need for ecological conversion, for a new way of looking at things. So what have we done with and to our Earth that has brought us to a crisis point? I'll look at a few of the more science-based aspects, and Father will examine the implications of our actions for all of creation, particularly our fellow inhabitants of this beautiful planet. So we're going to begin by asking a loaded question. The environment. What are we doing? This very short clip will give you an idea.
Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed. Mahatma Gandhi.
Does it make you sad and angry to see those pictures of what we've done? Now this photograph and all of the photographs from the Apollo missions shows our Earth glowing in the stillness of space like a blue-white opal on black velvet. Serene and beautiful, it hums along in the sun's gravitational embrace. This is our home, our entire world. Our existence and the future of mankind depend on this stunning and beautifully balanced, fragile planet. The enfolding blanket of air, our atmosphere, is both the physical condition necessary for the presence of the human community and its most compelling symbol. We all breathe the same air. Guarding the integrity of the atmosphere, without which complex life cannot exist on our planet, seems like common sense. Yet a broad consensus of modern science is that human activity has been altering the atmospheric characteristics in serious and profound ways that have now become noticeable. For the past century or more, scientists have been gathering and verifying data that reveal an increase in the average global temperature. While there have always been natural emissions of gases from volcanoes and radioactive decay adding to this temperature, it is now clear that there's an alarming rise above these natural emissions that can only be accounted for by human activity. Since 2001, assessment reports compiled by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme have concluded that most of the observed warming over the last 50 years is due to human-induced increase in greenhouse gas concentrations. The greenhouse effect, though complex in detail and effect, is simple enough to outline. Not considering the internal heating due to radioactive decay and volcanism, the Earth draws its thermal energy from the sun. Atmospheric gases form a protective cover that makes our planet able to sustain life as we know it, transmitting visible light, blocking out harmful high-energy radiation like ultraviolet rays, and keeping the temperatures comfortable by moderating the escape of heat into space. However, the precise mix of these gases is quite delicate, and changing that mix alters the atmosphere's properties. An increase in the relative abundance of what we call the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, chlorofluorocarbons, causes the Earth to trap more of the sun's heat, causing what is called global warming. Now, what causes greenhouse gases to accumulate in the atmosphere and warm the Earth? There are natural causes that we mentioned, such as volcanoes, and the atmosphere has been able to remain in balance through time from natural releases of greenhouse gases. However, since the introduction of fossil-fueled machines during the industrial age, the addition of man-made greenhouse gases has strained the ability of the atmosphere to remain in balance with regard to heating the Earth. In modern time, ever-increasing emissions from cars and trucks, industry, and electric plants, fossil fuels used to heat homes and businesses, and deforestation have caused first a gradual warming of the Earth that in recent years has galloped ahead of any previous predictions. You can see in this slide that was taken at the bottom in 1969 how clear the air was. This was taken last year up above it. Look at how polluted now. Global warming affects climate, altering patterns of precipitation around the world, causing flooding and drought. Melting of glaciers and polar ice caps cause sea levels to rise. Acid rain falls from the sky. These changes disproportionately affect the poor and the vulnerable because they are unable to escape the effects. They don't have the resources to move away, and their lifestyle with fragile housing and economic dependency upon nature is impacted severely and more immediately than those with the resources to move or to mitigate the effects of climate change. Severe storms have increased. What were called 100-year storms now occur in rapid sequence, so fast that recovery is not possible before the next one hits. Sea level rises will impact all those living in coastal, densely populated areas. But these storms and rises in sea level will most affect the fragile housing structures of the poor. And indeed, we have already seen the abandonment of some areas, particularly in the South Pacific, due to inundation by the sea. Droughts and floods increase as precipitation patterns are disrupted. The number of days with high heat and humidity will increase, and heat stress impacts will increase among the elderly, sick, children, and the poor. In addition to global climate change due to pollution of our atmosphere, we have not displayed good stewardship of our waters. Though our planet is roughly 75% water, only 3% is fresh water. We did make some great strides in reversing water pollution over the past 40 years in some countries. But with the globalization of economic greed, we are beginning to see the reversal of the good work done to protect and to clean up our waters. Now, the increased use of plastics, especially single-use plastics, has created a relatively new but immense impact on our environment. Global warming has accelerated in the last few years, and we are reaching a very critical point where we will not be able to rely on the resiliency of the planet to compensate. In our lifetime, we've seen changes to the atmosphere that are visible in terms of pollution. Drink bottled water because we no longer trust the supply from the tap. Experience events such as fires, hurricanes, floods, and drought that are unprecedented in number and severity, and note the extinction of once familiar species at a much accelerated rate. Currently, in my country, there is a superstorm every 12 to 18 months. Catholic Charities USA recorded 18,900 severe weather events to which they responded in the US alone last year. This is a huge increase from just 5 years ago. We humans have been fueling global warming indirectly since the industrial age began. While that might have something to do with our ignorance about the phenomenon, it is high time we take note of our misdeeds and restrain from continuing down this destructive path. As the earth warms, climate is altered, particularly precipitation, and we experience greatly increased flood and drought events due to this change in precipitation patterns. Without further ado, here are some numbers that are startling enough to be taken seriously. The statistical data compiled by the NASA Goddard Space Institute, which monitors global surface temperature, has revealed that the average near-surface temperature of the Earth has soared by 1.4 degrees since 1880. Even worse, global temperature has started increasing at an alarming rate of 0.36 degrees per decade. This directly affects our patterns of precipitation. You will find carbon dioxide topping the list of causes of global warming. An enormous amount of carbon dioxide is released in the atmosphere as a result of numerous anthropogenic activities, including the use of vehicles and industrial waste. Statistics reveal that coal alone constitutes 90% of the carbon concentration in the Earth's atmosphere. We were doing a decent job of reducing our carbon footprint due to coal, with strong regulations around its safe production and use, a push for smaller cars, and alternative forms of energy like solar and wind. Of course, big industry is the main source of carbon emissions, and it is hard to combat corporate greed. With loose environmental protections around the world, things like letting methane, one of the most powerful greenhouse gases, just be burned off and escape into the atmosphere rather than be recaptured and contained has become commonplace. When we talk of global warming, heat being trapped and raising the global temperature of our home planet. We need to note that while carbon dioxide tops the list, methane is worse because of its long life. The atmospheric concentration of methane increased from 700 parts per billion in the 1750s to 1,745 parts per billion in the 1990s. With a lifetime of 8.5 years, methane plays a huge role in fueling the rise in average global temperature. If we were to stop all activities that release methane in the atmosphere at this moment, it would take more than 9 years to rid it from the Earth's atmosphere. Glacial melting is one of the most prominent examples of global warming. There is a park in Montana, USA, that's left with 27 glaciers today, down from the 150 recorded in 1910. Predictions made by the U.S. Geological Survey indicate that Glacier National Park will be devoid of glaciers by 2030. Another example is that of the glaciers in the Himalayan mountain range. Studies concur that they will be gone by 2035. Glacial melting will result in flash floods in that region, leaving thousands of people homeless. Melting glaciers and polar ice caps are causing the sea level to rise around the world. A rise of 6 to 8 inches has already been recorded. If the ice caps in Greenland melt, as they are at present, this would cause the ocean to rise by about 20 meters. We're seeing this happen in the Marshall Islands. These were islands where you can see houses. They have now been abandoned because the waves wash over and they will be submerged. In addition to the displacement of people, anywhere from 15 to 37% of plant and animal species will disappear by 2050. A look at that list of extinct animals reveals that more than 50 major species have become extinct over the last 50 years alone. This is not taking into account our clear cutting of the Amazon, eliminating habitat not only of indigenous peoples, but of countless uncatalogued species of plants and animals. Fish are affected by global warming as the oxygen content in their waters decreases with warming to a point resulting in the inability to sustain life. Even mammals are not left untouched. In 2007, the U.S. Geological Survey estimated that the polar bear population would decrease by 2/3 by 2050 as a result of the decline in sea ice. Global warming and pollution are taking a huge toll on coral reefs as well. The Caribbean, a coral heaven at one point, has lost 80% of its reefs over the last 30 to 40 years. This is a picture that I took myself back in the 1960s on your left, and just about a year ago, the same exact spot on the right. You can see it's all dead. The most obvious abnormalities in weather can be seen in the context of drought and precipitation pattern changes. The percentage of land affected by drought worldwide has doubled from what it was in the 1970s, resulting in epidemics of starvation and health stresses of the old, vulnerable, young, and mass migrations from areas no longer able to be farmed. Over the last 100 years, the planet has lost about 40% of its forest cover, with a concurrent rise of 30% in desertification. It's become desert land. Statistics published in the journal Nature reveal that the frequency as well as the intensity of hurricanes has increased greatly over the last 30 years. Measures indicate that every 1.8 degree rise in the surface temperature of the ocean results in a 5% increase in the intensity of hurricanes. The heat feeds the severity of the hurricane. Everybody is bearing the brunt of climate change, but disproportionately, those in developing countries are paying the price for developed countries' use of fossil fuels, overfishing, use of harmful fertilizers, and resultant pollution of the water and air, and the rise of global temperatures setting off changes in climate affecting our beautiful Earth and the ability of future generations to live on all the land in health and peace. As Pope Francis tells us, the cry of the earth is the cry of the poor, for they do not have the ability to escape crushing heat, rising tides, polluted water and air. They breathe the polluted air emitted so those in developed countries can have electricity and heat for homes and businesses. Their lands are being inundated with the rise of the level of the sea, and others are losing their ancestral lands due to big business clearing forests and jungles, redirecting water sources, and mining pristine, irreplaceable landscapes. The eventual result will be mass migrations on a scale never seen before, as people are forced to move from areas of the world no longer habitable. Let's now take a look at what we are called to do as faithful Catholics who care for all our brothers and sisters and for our planet home. Global climate change is not a political issue or about partisan advantage or interest group pressure, but it is a moral issue. God gave us this planet as our home. We were charged with being good stewards. Each one of us needs to accept this responsibility. It is about the future of God's creation and the human family. It is about protecting both the human environment and the natural environment. As Pope Francis says, what kind of world do you want to leave your children? I'm now going to show you a very short video that I think you will enjoy that explores Laudato Si. It will prepare you well for our transition into Father's presentation on the human effects of our need to care for creation.
Thank you so much to Mary Beth for that beautiful account. Now, we'll just see if I can switch to my computer. Thank you very much to the sound engineer. As I said, this is an issue that needs to be treated from different angles. We need different experts informing us about these issues. And of course, every one of us has to take responsibility for these issues. So I switch now a little bit more towards, well, philosophy, theology, spirituality on the same issues. This, you see Pope Francis there. Of course, I'll be focusing on Laudato Si. You can't read it, I think, but it says, the caption, "Let us be protectors of creation, protectors of God's plan inscribed in nature, protectors of one another and of the environment." Doesn't that capture so much of what Mary Beth has already been saying? In fact, I want to just look at a summary of what we've heard. A lot of what Mary Beth spoke about, in fact, is related to chapter 1 of Laudato Si. What is the problem? We must be confident that there does exist a problem that should cause a scandal in us. Pope Francis in chapter 1 emphasizes 3 aspects: global warming, climate change, global warming, biodiversity, the reduction of species. Perhaps you read something in the newspaper last week, a report from the United Nations that said 1 million species are becoming extinct because of our behavior. As a matter of interest, the problem of extinct species happens above all in the tropics and the equatorial areas. So Latin America, Africa, Asia are especially vulnerable to these matters. We know we will be having a synod on the Amazon, a synod of bishops in October. In our university, we'll be organizing an event in support of the synod, and we'll be looking at the Congo Basin, the same problem in the Congo Basin, the river Congo, etc., as the Amazon. Same problem in Asia, places like the Mekong Delta, Southeast Asia. What's happening there? Ecological vulnerability, human vulnerability, often ethnic communities who are indigenous communities, and then a conspiracy of government corruption and big business, because people elsewhere don't care so much about these vulnerable areas and vulnerable peoples. That's the point of the Synod on the Amazon. It's not just about the Amazon. So that was anyway just my little adding to this point of the facts on the ground, biodiversity. A third point is access to water. This was a resolution in our previous mandate. African women know all about the problem of lack of access to water. But we actually helped in Argentina on this same sort of problem. Also Senegal and also Asia, Philippines. So well, we're talking about the human involvement at this stage, but it's one of the ecological problems, one of the 3 that Pope Francis lists. It's becoming increasingly difficult to have access to water. Mary Beth spoke about this. Mary Beth also spoke about responses. So you see, I just put up on the board COP21, I won't go into that, but these international agreements, the longer version of Mary Beth's talk speaks about this. I asked her to shorten it, and she was so disciplined. She's going to be shorter than my talk now. I'm embarrassed. But we're doing something. There is a response. Perhaps you notice your children, your grandchildren have an awareness about ecology. I notice it. I feel old. I was very concerned with social justice, certainly. The poor, it was my passion, and not that it is no longer. However, that passion extends to the environment now for younger people, for the poor people and for the poor earth. So it's not all bad news. There is a shifting of culture happening, and there are some good things happening at an international level, but they are weak. We know they're weak. So in one sense, I'm coming to the end of my introduction, which is only a repeat of Mary Beth, when I point to what she was also pointing out to. In the end, we have a moral responsibility. There is a human moral responsibility here to instruct our politicians to take decisions. We must pay the sacrifice, if necessary, of living more simply. And then, what's the link between religion and morality? We might think it's very obvious. Our religion helps us to be more moral, and this is true. But let's remember a couple of things here. Laudato Si is written for all people, whether they are Christian, other religions, or non-believing. The issue of ecology is obviously for all the people of the world. So we Catholics are ready to cooperate with anybody for good action concerning the environment. So we're aware that religion is one important motivator for ecological responsibility, but not the only motivator. So we are quite prepared to work with people who are of other religions or no religion. So we just notice that. So ecology is a moral issue. It's not only a Christian or a Catholic issue. Cooperation with others. But now I want to move on. I'm calling this still my introduction to my talk, but some people said they were shocked that I would even ask that question. Is religion part of the problem for ecology? Does Christianity produce arrogant and destructive human behavior? Have you ever heard that opinion expressed? Have you ever heard anyone say that? Well, it is around. In academic circles in the universities, you will hear this. And in fact, in the media, you will hear this. In 1966, there was a very famous article written in America by a professor from Princeton. The historic roots of our ecological crisis. Now, this was written at a time when people didn't know we had an ecological crisis. It's only from around that time that anybody started talking about ecology, really. I don't know if you ever heard of a book in America called The Silent Spring. A very evocative title. It had to do with the poisonous, what do you call them, the disinfectant for crops, protecting the crops so that they won't get any disease. But it killed all the birds. So this devastation to biodiversity, that's just one example. There were important books that opened awareness about the ecological crisis. But from this, one of the earliest comments on this said, there's a cultural problem that's causing our bad behavior to the environment. Greedy capitalism, etc. is connected to Christian theology, which says that we are more important than other creatures. We have a right to dominate nature. Now, this man was the son of a Protestant preacher and a very serious historian of technology in Princeton University. He said that there is this attitude that Christian revelation, Christian salvation, so much emphasizes the importance of the human being that for sometimes it says you can do whatever you want to nature because it doesn't count. Now, what is our honest response to this? Honestly, we must say there is some truth in this. If you think of Europe, the history in the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution, the sense of power of the human race, that we can do with the earth what we want because we're so important. Well, Europe was a Christian culture, one way and another. However, what we certainly say is that this is a sinful misuse of the gospel when it ever happens. Now, I had another little section on my notes that I decided to take away, even from my notes, just to say it. The Protestants were much worse than the Catholics here. The Protestants have this theology of you get saved. Only what Jesus tells you is important. The American Protestants were amongst the worst of all. The Puritans brought along their own plants to plant and didn't trust the American plants that they would discover there. There's an attitude of dominating the world because this is our destiny that has to do with the notion of we are saved because we're Christian. Anyway, this is discussed. It's not only me who says this. It was in Catholic theology, but it was even more in Protestant theology. But obviously, it's above all in greedy capitalism, which pretty quickly left Christianity behind. I say this because this issue is discussed in Laudato Si. In the light of the analysis of people like Lynn White in the 1960s, quite a lot of ecological ethicists started talking about spirituality, non-Christian spirituality, where human beings are not more important than other species. This is called biocentrism. They called it this. Biocentrism states the human species is not at a higher level than other species. If you've heard of New Age spirituality, the Gaia hypothesis, this is all over our culture. Have you ever heard your maybe teenage children, grandchildren saying, oh, you shouldn't think that human beings are better than animals because then you're just going to be violent. We should be humble and spiritual. And they might start saying things like Gaia, the goddess of the earth. We should be respectful. Well, this is what Pope Francis has to say. A misguided anthropocentrism, which is what we have. Anthropocentrism is too much on man and the dominance of nature. A misguided anthropocentrism need not necessarily yield to biocentrism, for that would entail adding yet another imbalance, failing to solve present problems and adding new ones. Okay, that's the end of my second part of my introduction. I hope you're not wilting. But I did want to mention this. Let's not be naive. Christians can be very criticized in the area of ecology. And sometimes ideas you'll find in the area of ecology are not compatible with our Christian beliefs. But then we remember that we are ready to cooperate with anybody as long as the policy is good for ecology, for the environment. But let us not be naive. We believe that there is something higher in the level of being for humans. The human destiny is a higher destiny than the other expressions of God's creation. This does not have to mean we exploit and dominate and destroy the environment. Quite the opposite. So now I want to talk about the main purpose of this talk, Catholic spiritual motivation for ecological commitment. This is why we are motivated. There will be some areas where we believe policies are mistaken that claim to be helping the environment. Some people will claim that abortion helps the environment, contraception, sterilization, reduce the population, etc. And then you don't harm the earth so much. So we are alert to this. So even though we are cooperating with other people, we want to be very clear on what is our Catholic understanding for our commitment to care of the environment. And what do we find in Laudato Si'? Two main points. In fact, I won't be taking so very long, so I have 2 points left in my talk. Obviously, St. Francis of Assisi is a model for us for ecological responsibility. But there's a second point, which I find very beautiful, but it's very heavy theology. So I warn you, please stay awake. For my second and last point, the world is a sacrament. So I'll explain a little bit more about that. St. Francis of Assisi. Quotation from Pope Francis. St. Francis is the example par excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology, lived out joyfully and authentically. He shows us just how inseparable the bond is between a concern for nature, justice for the poor, and commitment to society and interior peace. These are the links. Let me repeat that. How inseparable the bond is between a concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. Again, in calling to mind the figure of St. Francis of Assisi, we should come to realize that a healthy relationship with creation is one dimension of overall personal conversion. So here we see a link between two of our resolutions as WUCWO. Call to holiness, care for the environment. We Catholics believe in truth. You can't have one without the other. Now let's see if this works. Who is this Francis?
It's him! That lunatic there!
This is the father of Francis. Good, it's working. So if you know what I'm doing, I wonder if the translators will be able to translate, if you can hear. If I don't know, it's a bit obvious. A very beautiful movie on St. Francis of Assisi. This is his conversion moment. he declares in front of his father, in front of his village, his town, that he's leaving his old life behind, he's moving to a new life. The point here, there are details in it, but it's a personal religious experience. Do we have, you and me, do we have a personal encounter with Jesus Christ in our lives? This is the beginning of everything else we're going to be talking about. Of course, Pope St. Francis of Assisi is an extreme example, but nevertheless, we can make our small steps to be more like Francis of Assisi.
It's me. My soul is in your hands.
This is the Bishop of Assisi.
What? Are you trying to cause trouble? Is that what you're trying to do? Is this some damn plot to rob the church of its authority?
That's nothing to what he's done to me, Your Grace. I mean, God only knows I've always given him the best. I brought him up. I clothed him. I mean, you ask anyone, they'll tell you. He's never wanted for anything since the day he was born. But today, he threw all my belongings out of the window. And he even opened my stock boxes. Thrown to a mob of cutthroats like himself down in the street. Years of hard work and self-sacrifice just dust away.
Then what is the answer to these accusations? Surely you are sufficiently intelligent to understand that Holy Mother Church must punish those who subvert the established order. A man such as you is a menace to society. He's either criminal or
someone seeking the light. Someone in darkness. I was in darkness. But Brother Sun illuminated my soul. And now, I can see so clearly. Just as you did the day you chose the sacred vestments you are wearing now.
Are you seeking holy orders?
Me? No. I'm not worthy.
Then what do you want?
I want to be happy. I want to live like the birds in the sky. I want to experience the freedom and the purity that they experience. The rest is of no use to me. No use, believe me. If the purpose of life is this loveless toil we fill our days with, then it's not for me. There must be something better. There has to be. Man is a spirit. He has a soul. And that is what I want to recapture. My soul. I want to live. I want to live in the fields, stride over hills, climb trees, swim rivers. I want to feel the firm grasp of the earth beneath my feet, without shoes, without possessions, without those shadows we call our servants. I want to be a beggar. Yes, a beggar. Christ was a beggar, and his holy apostles were beggars. I want to be as free as they are.
Your Grace, even beggars show respect to their fathers.
I'm not your son anymore.
What?
What is born of the flesh is flesh. What is born of the spirit is spirit.
Just after this point, Francis takes off all his clothes, So we'll skip that part. Now, because of time, I'm going to skip these slides, but it's obvious already from the video. What are the aspects of the religious experience of of Saint Francis of Assisi? Love of the poor, love of all creation, reform of the church, that's very evident. This is a painting of the Pope listening to Francis. The Franciscans, as an order, when they grew in numbers very quickly, challenged the corruption of the Catholic Church. Francis of Assisi wasn't completely innocent in his innocence, if you know what I mean. He knew he was a prophet against corruption in the church, to get back to a simplicity of the life of Jesus that had something to do with stepping away from materialism and getting back to harmonious living with fellow human beings, especially the poor, and with the earth. Now, I must go very quickly over the next section. Does that painting say anything for you? What's that painting about? I don't know if you can see it very clearly. It's the Last Supper. I've jumped centuries from the earlier paintings by Giotto in 1400s. Now I'm in the 20th century, Salvador Dali. This is a painting that's trying to communicate the Last Supper, the Eucharist, the Catholic Mass, and the universe. That Jesus is integrating the whole universe. I must jump to the quotations from Laudato Si. This is present in Laudato Si. It is a deep theology, but it's a very beautiful spirituality as well. It connects the Eucharist to integral theology. It says almost something close to all of creation is a sacrament, but it is human beings who are the priests who offer up creation to God the Father by a just use of the environment, by using stewardship well. We develop the use of created things for our own good, because we have a special destiny in the plan of God as human beings. We offer up creation. We bring creation to its fulfillment through the work we do to praise God, including creating a just society, but including offering the sacrament of the Eucharist. Because the Eucharist, as well as remembering Jesus Christ, anticipates the end of time, because creation will come to an end and all things will be brought into heaven. The created universe and human beings. But we are more important. Created universe passes through us as we pass in Jesus Christ, who became man, into eternal life. The whole universe will come to an end, and the human destiny will be made clear in that context. And every time we celebrate the Mass, we are remembering this. We remember the future at Mass. We think of the future as well as remembering the past. So I've been a bit too brief, but now I'm just finishing with two quotations on this same point from Pope Francis in Laudato Si. At the end, we will find ourselves face to face with the infinite beauty of God, and be able to read with admiration and happiness the mystery of the universe, which with us will share in unending plenitude. Even now, we are journeying towards the Sabbath of eternity. See the sacramental language. In the meantime, we come together to take charge of this home. See how far we have come from biocentrism. This is not biocentrism. We come together to take charge of this home, which has been entrusted to us, knowing that all the good which exists here will be taken up into the heavenly feast. So we pray that this may be our spirituality, the Eucharist and integral ecology. St. Francis of Assisi as model for an integrated life, based in religious conversion, committed to the common good of human society, in harmony with respect for nature. Thank you.
We want to close our session by letting you know that we have 14 persons live streaming with us. And we want to thank them for being with us today and listening to what we had to say, these important messages, and thank all of you. Maria, do you have any information for us?
Quiero agradecer esta.
Thank you very much for this very beautiful training information that the Father Jerry and Mary Beth have offered us. And I should like to thank all the people connected in streaming with us. So I should like to say that we are waited to be given the headsets because we are starting the ecumenical prayer in a few minutes. Thank you all. And we are moving on first floor for the ecumenical prayer.